Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're jumping into something big, really big, financial independence, and specifically that $2 million target for, maybe retiring a bit early.
hmm And you're probably here because you want the real story, the essentials, without getting totally bogged down.
Exactly. We want to get you up to speed fast.
And it's a timely topic.
That- that-
There's this common fear, right? That statistic about two-thirds of Americans being more scared of running out of money than death itself. It's pretty telling.
Wow. Yeah, that really hits home. It shows why understanding this stuff is so important. So our mission today.
Let's break it down. What does $2 million actually mean for retirement? How do you realistically get there? And crucially, how do you make sure it lasts?
Okay, good. We want to move from that fear or maybe overwhelm to just clarity, a roadmap.
Right. And that $2 million number, it's not just pulled out of thin air, is it?
No, not at all. It often connects back to this thing called the 4% rule.
Which basically suggests with a $2 million portfolio, you could potentially withdraw about $80,000 a year.
Right. Which comes out to, what, around $6,600 a month, give or take, without theoretically eating into your original savings.
Yeah, that's the idea. It gives you a pretty solid income stream just from investments.
And where did this rule come from? The Trinity study, I think.
That's the one. The core idea was, historically speaking, if you withdrew 4% in your first year of retirement and then adjusted that dollar amount for inflation each year after, there's a really high chance your money would last for at least 30 years. So it became a kind of benchmark.
A foundational piece for early retirement planning. But it's not quite that simple anymore, is it?
No, definitely not a hard and fast rule. There's nuance. Morningstar, for example, did some research
Okay.
suggesting that the safe rate really depends on market conditions when you retire. So if stocks are really expensive, high PE ratios,
Right.
maybe you need to be more conservative. Start closer to, say, 3.3%.
Okay, that makes sense. Be more cautious if the market seems high.
But interestingly, if you happen to retire during a big market dip when stocks are cheaper,
Yeah.
you might actually be able to start a bit higher, maybe even up to 5%. It adapts.
So context matters a lot. Okay, this is where it gets really practical. The path to $2 million. It looks very different depending on your starting line, doesn't it?
Well, massively different. The biggest factor is time. Compounding is just, well, it's incredibly powerful.
Give us an example. Someone starting young.
Okay, let's say you start at 25, aiming for $2 million by age 60, assuming, an average 8% return. You'd need to invest about $905 a month.
$905, which, when you think about it, might be less than what some people spend on, I don't know, coffees and lunches out or subscriptions each month.
Exactly. It puts it in perspective. But now let's shift that starting point. What if you start later, say age 40, same goal, $2 million by 60?
Okay, what's the damage?
Well, suddenly you're looking at needing to invest around $2,433 a month.
Wow, that's more than double, almost triple.
It really shows you the brutal tax of procrastination, as some call it. Waiting just 15 years makes a huge difference in the required effort.
Yeah, that opportunity cost is real. And it ties into something else you mentioned, forgotten spending.
Right. The little things we buy and don't use or subscriptions we forget about. The estimate is maybe $1,500 a year for the average person.
Which is about $125 a month, just kind of vanishing.
But if you took that $125 a month and invested it instead over, say, 35 years.
I mean, guess it adds up.
It adds up big time, potentially $228,000.
Just from redirecting that small amount, that's incredible.
Wow.
Okay, let's talk returns. You mentioned that 8% average assumption.
Yeah, often based on the S&P 500's history, minus inflation. But, and this is a big but, you absolutely have to remember, it's an average.
Right. It's not going to be 8% every single year.
It's not even close. The market swings wildly.
Yeah.
Historically, annual returns for the S&P have gone from down 37% in a bad year to up maybe 43% in a really good year. It's a roller coaster.
And that inconsistency, that volatility, it has its own cost, right? The volatility tax.
Exactly. Even if your long-term average return is the same as someone else's, if your returns bounce around more violently, you can actually end up with less money. Because big losses early on need even bigger gains just to get back to even. It erodes your compounding.
Which is why diversification is so key. Don't put all your eggs in one volatile basket.
Precisely. Spreading investments helps smooth out those bumps, reduces the hit from any one area doing badly. It's fundamental.
Okay, so we know why and what to save. Let's talk about the how. the accounts. A 401k is the obvious one for many people.
Sure, it's often the main vehicle during your working years.
Yeah.
Huge benefits. But for early retirement,
Yeah.
you run into the access problem.
Yeah.
Usually you can't touch that money without penalties until you're 59 and a half.
Right. So if you retire at, say, 50, you need other ways to get funds. Which brings us to things like the Roth conversion ladder. Can you walk us through that?
Yeah, it's a really smart strategy for early retirees. The basic idea is, in those early retirement years when your income might be lower, you move money, you convert it from a traditional tax-deferred account like your 401k
Right.
or a traditional IRA into a Roth IRA.
Okay. And you pay taxes on that conversion amount.
Yes, you pay income tax that year.
Right.
But here's the key. Once that money is in the Roth, after a 5-year waiting period for each conversion amount,
5 years. Got it.
you can withdraw the converted amount, not the earnings yet, just the principal you converted, completely tax-free and penalty-free, even before 59 and a half.
So it creates a pipeline of accessible money. Convert some each year, wait 5 years, then start drawing.
Exactly. It takes planning, but it's a major tool for early access.
Okay. Are there other ways? What about Rule 72T?
Rule 72 is another option. It lets you take penalty-free withdrawals before 59 and a half too. But it's structured differently.
How so?
You have to take what are called substantially equal periodic payments.
Yeah.
SEPPs. They're calculated based on your life expectancy and account balance.
Okay, so regular fixed payments.
Right. The upside is you get access immediately, no 5-year wait like the Roth conversions. But the downside is inflexibility.
How so?
Once you start these SEPP payments, you generally have to keep taking them for at least 5 years or until you hit 59 and a half, whichever is longer. Changing the amount can trigger big penalties backdated to the start.
So less wiggle room than the latter. Got it. Okay, we see starting early is huge, and there are ways to get funds. Let's look at how this plays out over time. You mentioned 3 scenarios.
Yeah, these really drive home the power of starting early versus later. First up, the slow and steady.
Okay.
This person starts at 25, invests $450 a month until they're 65.
$450 a month for 40 years.
Right. Total money they put in, $216,000 over those 4 decades.
And the result, assuming that 8% average.
Potentially $2.07 million.
Wow.
And get this, about $1.8 million of that is just the growth of compound interest working for them.
So the vast majority isn't even their own contributions, it's the earnings on the earnings. Incredible. Okay, scenario 2.
The mid-career accelerator. Starts later, age 35. Needs to invest more. $1,150 a month until 65.
Okay, investing for 30 years now, total investment.
That's $414,000 they put in. Almost double the first person.
And the final amount?
Still lands around $2.04 million. So you put in way more money, but end up in roughly the same place because you lost those first 10 years of compounding.
That difference is stark. Okay, last one. Late stage power move.
This person starts at 45, only 20 years to invest until 65. They have to really ramp it up $2,700 a month.
2 decades of aggressive saving, total contribution.
A hefty $648,000. Triple what the first person invested.
And they end up with?
Right around that $2 million mark again.
It's just crystal clear, isn't it? Starting early lets you do so much more with so much less of your own cash. Like Warren Buffett said, compound interest.
Is the 8th wonder of the world.
Yeah.
He who understands it earns it. He who doesn't pays it.
Definitely. But like we said, the path isn't smooth. That average return hides the ups and downs. Which brings us to a major risk, especially near retirement. Sequence of returns risk.
Yeah, this is a really critical concept. It's basically the danger of hitting a big market downturn right when you're starting to withdraw money.
Why is that timing so bad?
Because if you're forced to sell your investments when their prices are low, early in retirement, you lock in those losses.
Yeah.
It drastically reduces the amount of capital you have left to grow and sustain you for potentially decades. It can cripple a plan.
Especially for an early retiree who might need the money to last 30, 40 years or more. So how do you protect against that? A cash buffer.
That's a primary strategy. Keep maybe 2 to 3 years worth of your planned expenses in safe, easily accessible stuff like cash or maybe short-term bonds.
So if you need $80,000 a year?
You'd want $160,000 to $240,000 sitting safely aside. That way, if the market tanks, you live off the buffer instead of selling your stocks low. You give the market time to recover.
Makes sense. It's insurance against bad timing, essentially. Though you do sacrifice some potential growth by holding cash.
It's a trade-off, absolutely. Security versus potential upside.
And didn't Bill Bengen, the 4% rule guy, update his thinking on this a bit?
He did. His later research suggested that if you diversify well, maybe including things like small-cap and mid-cap value stocks,
Okay.
you might be able to sustain slightly higher withdrawal rates, maybe 4.5% or even 5% historically. Again, highlights how asset allocation matters.
And there's another strategy mentioned, the bond tent. Sounds intriguing.
Yeah, it's a visual name for a strategy to manage that sequence risk. The idea is you gradually increase your bond holdings, the safer stuff, in the years leading up to retirement.
Okay, so more conservative as you get closer.
Right. Maybe you go from, say, 20% bonds at age 45 up to maybe 50% bonds right at retirement. That forms the peak of the tent. It cushions you against a downturn right at the start.
But then what? You stay at 50% bonds forever.
No, that's the other side of the tent. As you get further into retirement, maybe by age 75 or so,
Yeah.
you might gradually reduce your bond allocation again, perhaps back down to 30%.
Why reduce it later?
To allow for more growth potential from stocks later in retirement, to combat inflation over a long period. So you build up the bond protection for the risky transition years, then ease off it a bit for long-term growth.
Interesting. A dynamic approach. Okay, let's shift to something super impactful.
Oh.
Taxes. Saving potentially hundreds of thousands through smart tax planning. That got my attention.
Oh, it's huge. It's not just about how much you earn or save, but how much you keep.
Yeah.
Tax optimization is critical.
So what's a key strategy? Tax arbitrage.
Exactly. It's about playing the long game with tax brackets.
Mm.
During your peak earning years, you're likely in a higher tax bracket.
Mhm.
So you contribute to traditional tax-deferred accounts like a 401k. You get a tax deduction now when taxes hurt more. Your money grows tax-deferred.
Okay. And then?
Then, in early retirement, your income's probably much lower. You're in a lower tax bracket. That's when you strategically convert portions of that traditional money to a Roth account.
And pay taxes on the conversion then, but at your new lower rate.
Precisely. You effectively shift the tax burden from your high-tax working years to your lower-tax retirement years. Over decades and large sums, the savings can be enormous.
That's clever. What about for high earners? The backdoor Roth and mega backdoor Roth. Sounds kind of sneaky.
They sound that way, but they're perfectly legal strategies allowed by the IRS. They help people get money into Roth accounts even if their income is too high for direct contributions.
How does the regular backdoor work?
You make a contribution to a non-deductible traditional IRA. Anyone can do this regardless of income. Then, shortly after, you convert that traditional IRA to a Roth IRA. Presto, money's in the Roth.
Okay, and the mega version?
That one's more complex and depends on your employer's 401k plan allowing it. But if it does, you can make after-tax contributions to your 401k above the usual limit.
That's for tax, not Roth.
Got it. Right. And then you can often convert those after-tax contributions directly into a Roth 401k or roll them over to a Roth IRA. It allows for much larger Roth contributions, potentially up to, what was it, $40,500 total in 2023, combined with other sources. It's powerful for super savers.
Wow, definitely is something for high earners to look into. And we can't forget HSA's health savings accounts. You called them maybe the most tax-advantaged account.
They really might be, because they have that triple tax advantage.
HA.
Contributions are tax-deductible going in. The money grows tax-free. And withdrawals are tax-free if used for qualified medical expenses.
Okay, that's pretty great.
But here's the super strategy for early retirement planning. Don't necessarily use the HSA to pay medical bills now. Pay those out of pocket if you can and save your receipts.
Why do that?
Because you can reimburse yourself from the HSA for those past medical expenses completely tax-free anytime in the future, years later, even decades later in retirement.
So the HSA just keeps growing tax-free like another retirement account, and you tap it later by reimbursing yourself for old bills.
Exactly. It effectively becomes a stealth retirement account with amazing tax benefits, especially useful given how high healthcare costs can be in retirement.
Very smart. Okay, thinking about that $2 million target again.
Yeah.
We need to factor in inflation, right? $2 million in 30 years won't buy what it buys today.
Absolutely critical point. Inflation erodes purchasing power over time. If we assume, say, 2.5% average inflation, someone who's 30 today might actually need closer to $3.5 million by the time they retire in their 60s to have the same lifestyle that $2 million affords now. You have to adjust your target upwards.
Okay, so the real target might be higher, but conversely, there's geographic arbitrage, moving somewhere cheaper.
Right. This can work the other way. Your $2 million, or maybe even less, could go a lot further if you retire to an area with a significantly lower cost of living.
Domestically or even internationally?
Both. Moving from, say, California to a lower-cost state can make a big difference. Or going abroad to places like Portugal, Panama, Thailand.
Yeah, you mentioned those. What's the draw?
Significantly lower costs for housing, food, healthcare sometimes. Portugal has residency programs, a good climate. Panama has its Pensionado visa with discounts. Thailand is known for being very affordable. It can drastically reduce the size of the nest egg you need.
But moving abroad isn't simple. There are other things to think about.
Oh, absolutely. Healthcare quality and access is huge. Understanding the tax situation, are there treaties to avoid double taxation? Currency risk, what if the exchange rate moves against you? Being far from family. Language barriers, cultural fit.
Lots to consider. Maybe a hybrid approach works for some, part-time abroad.
Yeah, that's becoming more popular. Spend winters somewhere warm and cheap, summers back home. It requires careful planning, though.
Okay. Another big cost, especially for early retirees,
Yeah.
healthcare before Medicare kicks in at 65.
Huge potential expense. If you're retiring in your 50s without an employer plan, you're looking at buying insurance on the marketplace, likely through the ACA.
And the cost.
It can be substantial. Easily $15,000 to $25,000 a year for a couple, maybe more, depending on coverage and health.
Wow. And this ties back to managing income, right, for subsidies.
Exactly. ACA subsidies are based on your modified adjusted gross income, MAGI. So strategically managing your income through things like Roth conversions becomes really important to keep those premiums affordable in those pre-Medicare years.
It all connects. Interestingly, the notes mention health optimization as a financial strategy, like being healthy saves you money.
It sounds obvious, but the financial impact is real. Investing in your health, good diet, exercise, sleep, managing stress, staying connected socially isn't just good for you, it's good for your wallet long term.
How so?
Less chronic disease means lower healthcare costs down the road. There was a study mentioned, Jamie, I think, finding people with good cardiovascular health spend something like $5,000 less per year on healthcare in their senior years.
So taking care of yourself is a financial plan. Love it. Okay, shifting back to investments. When you actually retire early, how should your asset allocation change? That old 100 minus your age in stocks rule seems too basic.
Way too basic, especially if you might be retired for 40 or 50 years. You need growth to beat inflation long term, but you also need stability, especially early on because of that sequence risk,
Yeah.
and maybe some income generation. It's a balancing act.
So what does a more sophisticated mix look like?
It's always personalized, but a reasonable starting point might be something like maybe 50–60% in broad stock market funds, both U.S. and international.
Okay, for growth.
Maybe 15–20% specifically in international stocks for diversification. Then perhaps 10–15% in bonds for stability. And then smaller slices, maybe 5–10% in REITs, real estate investment trusts, for inflation protection income, and maybe 5–10% in alternatives like gold or commodities for diversification.
A much more diversified pie. And what about rebalancing? Is that really important?
It is. It's the discipline of bringing your portfolio back in line with those target percentages periodically. You sell what's done well, sell high, and buy what's lagged by low.
And that actually helps returns.
Research suggests it can add a small rebalancing bonus over time, maybe around 0.5% a year. It enforces that buy low, sell high discipline.
How often should you do it? Calendar-based or?
Calendar, like annually, is common. But threshold rebalancing might be better. That means you only rebalance when an asset class drifts too far from its target, say, more than 5% away. It avoids unnecessary trading, but still keeps your risk level in check.
Okay. Now, Social Security. If you retire at 50, it feels like a lifetime away. Is it even relevant to planning?
Surprisingly, yes. Even if you retire early, Social Security will likely still be a part of your income stream eventually. And for a couple who are high earners, the total lifetime value could be huge, maybe $500,000 or more in today's money.
Wow, so you need to make sure you qualify the 35 years of earnings.
Exactly. Even if some of those later years are lower earnings from part-time work and early retirement, getting those 35 years in is important for maximizing your benefit.
And claiming strategies. Just wait till 70.
Not necessarily the best move for everyone, especially couples. There are complex strategies. Maybe one spouse claims earlier for income, while the higher earner delays until 70 to maximize their benefit and the survivor benefit. It requires careful thought.
Okay, this has been fantastic on the nuts and bolts. But the notes also talk about the other side of early retirement purpose, fulfillment. Apparently, a lot of people go back to work.
It's a significant number, yeah.
Yeah.
Close to 40%. And usually it's not because they ran out of money.
Really? Why then?
Lack of purpose, boredom, missing the social connection or mental challenge of work. It highlights that financial independence is just one piece of the puzzle. You need to retire to something, not just from something.
That leads to this idea of passion income. I like the sound of that.
Me too. It's doing work you enjoy, on your terms, maybe part-time, maybe consulting, maybe turning a hobby into a small business. It's not primarily for the money, though the money helps.
How much does it help financially?
Even a small amount, say $1,000 or $2,000 a month, can make a big difference. It reduces the withdrawal pressure on your portfolio, significantly boosts its success rate, and provides a buffer. But maybe more importantly, it provides that structure, purpose, and engagement.
So it's as much about psychological well-being as financial security.
Absolutely. There's research, Harvard, I think, on what makes for well-being in retirement. Purpose, autonomy, growth, relationships, mastery, self-acceptance. Money mostly buys autonomy, but you need the others too.
And for couples, being on the same page about what retirement looks like is key.
Crucial. If one person envisions constant travel and the other wants to stay home and garden, you've got a problem. Doing a retirement dress rehearsal is a great idea.
How does that work?
Take a couple of weeks off work, but live exactly as you plan to in retirement. Same budget, same activity, same schedule. See how it actually feels. You learn a lot about what works and what doesn't.
Great practical tip. Now, what if the slow and steady path feels too slow? Are there faster ways to get towards that $2 million? Real estate, business.
Definitely alternative paths. Real estate is a big one. You can use leverage, which you can't easily do with stocks. There are tax advantages, depreciation, 231 exchanges to defer capital gains taxes. You can force appreciation through improvements.
So potentially faster wealth building.
Potentially, yes.
Right.
A portfolio of cash-flowing rental properties could replace the income from a $2 million stock portfolio, maybe with less initial capital. And owning a successful small business. That's another way. Building equity and selling could compress decades of saving. People often use SBA loans to buy existing businesses.
And just earning more. Strategic career optimization.
Yeah, sometimes focusing on boosting your income is more powerful than extreme penny pinching. Getting promotions, changing jobs for higher pay, developing valuable skills that significantly increases your savings capacity, which then gets supercharged by compounding.
Makes sense. And the FIRE movement itself isn't monolithic, right? There are different flavors.
Oh yeah, several variations. There's Coast FIRE.
Coast FIRE.
That's where you've saved enough already that even if you never save another penny, your investments are projected to grow to cover a traditional retirement later on. You just let it coast.
Ah, okay. What else?
Barista FIRE is kind of like Coast FIRE, but you work part-time, maybe just enough to get benefits like health insurance while your investments keep growing. Lean FIRE is retiring early on a very small nest egg by living extremely frugally. And the opposite is Fat FIRE, saving a lot more than $2 million for a really luxurious retirement.
So, a whole spectrum. Is there a sweet spot for happiness?
Some research suggests it's often somewhere in the middle. Not extreme deprivation, but not necessarily needing vast sums either. Having enough for comfort and experiences, plus strong social ties and purpose, seems key.
Good point. Okay, once you do hit that $2 million mark, or get close, estate planning becomes more important, right? Especially if you're retiring early and might live another 40, 50 years.
Absolutely. Reaching financial independence is just the start of managing wealth long-term and thinking about how to pass it on eventually.
Yeah.
The basics are essential. A will, power of attorney for finances, healthcare directive, maybe a trust.
Then for larger amounts.
Then you might look at more advanced stuff. ARITs, irrevocable life insurance trusts, donor-advised funds for charitable giving, maybe using 529 plans for grandkids, charitable remainder trusts, QPRTs for your house, dynasty trusts to minimize estate taxes over generations. It gets complex.
Definitely professional advice there. Before we wrap up, any conventional wisdom that this deep dive kind of challenges for early retirees?
One big one is the advice to just contribute enough to get the employer match in your 401k. That's fine as a minimum, but for early retirement, it's nowhere near enough.
What should the target be?
Aiming for at least 20% of your income, saved and invested, is a much more realistic benchmark if you want to significantly shorten your working career.
20% or more. Got it. And other insurance besides health insurance?
Yeah, definitely consider long-term care insurance. The cost of needing care later in life can be devastating. Umbrella liability insurance is crucial as your net worth grows, protecting you beyond your standard policies. And life insurance might still have a role for estate planning, or if dependents still rely on you, even if not for income replacement.
Okay. And finally, withdrawing the money. We talked about the 4% rule, but strategies have evolved.
They have. The 4% rule is a good starting point, but it's quite rigid. Modern methods offer more flexibility.
Like what?
Things like variable percentage withdrawal, VPW, which adjusts withdrawal amounts based on portfolio performance and age. Or the Guyton-Klinger rules, which have guardrails rules to cut spending if the portfolio drops, or allow increases if it does well. There's also the floor and ceiling approach. They often allow potentially higher starting withdrawals by building in adaptability.
More dynamic. And what about paying off the house before retirement? Always the best move.
Not always. The traditional advice is yes, be debt-free. But if your mortgage rate is very low and you expect your investments to earn significantly more long-term, you might actually build more wealth by keeping the mortgage and investing the extra cash instead. It depends on the math, your risk tolerance, tax situation. It's not automatic. Some even use reverse mortgages strategically as a line of credit in retirement.
So many variables. It really seems like flexibility is the name of the game.
It's probably the most underrated superpower in early retirement. Being willing to adjust spending if markets are down or maybe earning a little passion income, it massively increases your plan's resilience. And you need that resilience because of longevity risk.
The risk of outliving your money because you're retired for so long.
Exactly. Planning for 30 years might not be enough if you retire at 50 and live to 95. That's 35 years. It's why keeping a decent chunk in stocks for growth, even well into retirement, is often recommended. And maybe considering things like longevity insurance, like a deferred income annuity or QLAC that starts paying out only if you live to an advanced age, say 85, it creates a safety net for extreme old age.
Wow. Okay, so wrapping this all up, that $2 million target, it's really a symbol, isn't it? A tool.
It is. It's a tool for freedom, for choice, for living life more on your own terms. It's not just about the number itself.
It's the difference between never work again and maybe never have to work again.
Exactly. That's a huge distinction. The power is in the choice.
So maybe the final thought for everyone listening is beyond the numbers. If money wasn't the main driver, what would you do? What are you actually retiring to?
That's the $1 million or $2 million question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And for some, maybe full-stop retirement isn't the answer. Maybe semi-retirement, that blend of work and leisure, is the sweet spot.
Lots to think about. Hopefully this deep dive has given you a solid framework and some actionable ideas for your own journey. Thanks for joining us.